Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Koritis. Today is Wednesday, January 13th, 2021. Thank you so much for joining me. Title of today's podcast, Impeached Again and Savings Stolen. So this is a carryover from yesterday's podcast, and my apologies for getting that uploaded late. I had some internet difficulties, so that's why that was uploaded this afternoon as opposed to yesterday evening, but it is up there. Episode 512, another impeachment and debt craziness. So as I just stated, this is going to be a carryover from yesterday's podcast because the House did vote today to impeach President Donald J. Trump, a vote of 232 to 197, with 10 Republicans crossing the line, if you will, in voting to impeach the President of the United States. So I guess technically, by definition, this was a bipartisan vote to impeach the president because during his first impeachment last year, seems like an eternity ago, there were no Republicans on the House side that voted to impeach the president. Senator Mitt Romney did vote to convict the president on one of the counts against Donald Trump. Now, there are some stories circulating out there, obviously behind closed doors, that more Republicans would have voted to impeach the president, but they were afraid for their lives, afraid for their families, or perhaps just afraid for their political careers because of the threats that are coming down the pike, the phone calls, the emails that they are receiving from people around the country, and of course, including a lot of their constituents. We cannot allow ourselves to be intimidated and to vote accordingly from those threats. That is a very dangerous way to run a government. It's a very, very slippery slope. Because those are the arguments that we have sort of before us, people who are for impeachment, people who are against impeachment. If you do impeach him, well, then there's going to be more protests, more riots, there can be more violence. Then others will say, well, it's the right thing to do because he incited a riot. These types of actions, these words, this rhetoric, it needs to be held to account so that no other president thinks that he or she can get away with this type of behavior. Again, legitimate arguments on both sides, and of course some political calculus on both sides, with the Democrats doing this, one, because they despise the president, and because they want to get Republicans on the record voting for or against this. Because clearly the country does not and did not like what took place last Wednesday at the U.S. Capitol, and rightly so. But that in and of itself does not mean, as I've stated since last week, that does not mean that there are not legitimate reasons to put our politicians, to put our government on notice. They should be put on notice. It's 1,000,001 legitimate reasons to go after them. Peacefully, civilly. We don't need to make this completely political about whether an election was rigged or not, because that just serves to further divide the country. All of the legitimate reasons can actually unite the country. People are sick and tired of being sick and tired across the entire political spectrum. There is a lot of overlap between Trump supporters and Bernie Sanders supporters. A lot more than the media would have you believe. And a lot of this is rooted in the economic environment because of the poor policies. You just have a different political philosophy that comes into the fold, which is why you have the arguments of Donald Trump and Republicans and why you have the argument of Bernie Sanders and some Democrats. But at the end of the day, there's a ton of overlap. That's something that can bring the country together. I'm not naive to believe that, okay, there are legitimate reasons and everybody's just going to get behind it and put these people on notice, make them all resign, like I've been saying, hashtag fire Congress. I don't expect that to happen. I'd like to see that happen, but I'm not naive. I don't expect that to be the case. But to me, that's the better option than just making this 100% political and more divisive. And it's even going to continue to cause a further schism within the Republican Party. Because obviously some Republicans are no longer on the Trump train. They're abandoning ship. That's it. Sayonara, see you later. And of course, the Senate Majority Leader, or the former Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, is coming out and saying there's no way that impeachment is going to be finished or concluded before Inauguration Day, which is 1 week from today, January 20th. So this is Mitch McConnell's way of sort of sidestepping it and saying, well, I'm not going to bring this to the floor and have everything run quickly during the next week to get this guy out before the inauguration ceremony. I'll pass the buck and I'll give that to the incoming Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer. He can take the baton, whatever, and run with it. So he's going to sidestep. There's political calculus all over the place. Again, all of these politicians care about themselves before anybody else. Before you, before the president, before the country. They don't care. As long as they're getting their comfy paycheck, all of their political donations, invitations to all of the black tie affairs in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere, their benefits, their pension, they don't care. They don't care. They will do, say, whatever they have to maintain their position. So, of course, history was made today, unfortunately, another sad day for the United States of America, because President Trump became the first and only president to be impeached twice. And he's done so this has happened within his first term. So that says something. And again, it says something about the president himself, and it says something about the Democratic Party. And really just the country at large, because this is a reflection of who we are, because we're the ones who continue to vote these lunatics into office, and then we look at each other and scratch our heads as to why we are in such disarray, decline, and decay. People just can't seem to figure it out. So that's that. I still would like to see the president give a farewell address. He did make a comment today, released a video from the Oval Office this afternoon. The tone was better. I would like to have seen this tone prior to the election and after the election. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, could have easily won re-election. He is his own worst enemy. He cannot get out of his own way. Had he handled the pandemic just a little bit better, if he was a little bit more forthright, as opposed to, as he said to Bob Woodward, you know, Bob, I just want to downplay it. No matter what the case, I just wanted to continue to downplay. That could have made a big difference. If he would have stopped the divisive tweeting and rhetoric, that could have made the difference. If he would have stopped pointing the finger at Democrats for everything that ails this country, that they are the enemy, the president could have won re-election. But if you want to be a divider as opposed to somebody who attempts to unite, well, this is what happens. So I don't know if this was on purpose because he really didn't want to win. He was just putting on a show, acting like the tough guy. He's tired of the job. Or if this is just simply who he is, and it's probably more that. It's just simply who he is, because we've seen enough iterations of Donald Trump to know this is who he is. It's not a show. Cannot control himself. And in this position as the President of the United States, the most powerful person in the world, you have to have some self-control. So this is where we are. The country is deeply divided. That is not going to be rectified anytime soon. Joe Biden wants to come out and claim that he is the president of all Americans, that he wants to unite all Americans. Well, it's not going to help the country, Joe, if you immediately call everybody who was protesting at the U.S. Capitol domestic terrorists. I think most of those people are not going to take kindly to being called domestic terrorists when most of them were simply exhibiting and practicing their constitutional right. But no, it just doesn't compute with these people. Again, they're lunatics on both sides. But that's what he says. All domestic terrorists. Same thing with the media. They want to push everything. Oh, my goodness. And you thought 2020 was bad. This is what I've been saying for months. 2021 is going to be worse than 2020. Especially economically, and now it appears also the case politically and from a society standpoint. Health-wise, I can't speak to that. Obviously, they're claiming there's other strains of COVID-19 that are even more dangerous, perhaps. We'll see what unfolds. So, impeached again, history was made. Unfortunately, it was once again in the wrong direction. Some market performance. We have the dollar index trading at 90.37, so maintaining that 90 handle. Bitcoin is trading at about $38,000 a coin, so getting back close to all-time highs. Not a lot of movement right now in the overnight trading for the currency market, so we'll leave it at that. Overnight futures trading for the Dow Jones Industrial Average is up about 0.1%. The S&P 500 is gaining 0.25%. The NASDAQ 100 is relatively flat. Japanese cash trade putting on another 1.1% gain. So again, continuing to trade around 30-year highs. Mixed bag across the pond in Europe, but pretty stable, but nothing miraculous. And the Australian cash trade put on a gain of about 0.5%. With respect to commodities, a little bit of a pullback. WTI trading at $52.88. Brent at $55.96. Natural gas, $2.76. Gold trading at $1,840 an ounce. Silver at $25.20 an ounce. Those are spot prices. Uncle Sam's U.S. 10-year junk note is yielding 1% even. Now, we got some further news this evening that the incoming Biden administration is already looking to pass a $2 trillion, quote-unquote, stimulus package. $2 trillion. Who didn't see this coming? So let's just get this straight. We passed the $900 billion monstrosity a couple weeks ago in conjunction with a $1.4 trillion spending bill just to keep the lights on for a few months here in this country. And now they're looking to pass another $2 trillion. And I can guarantee you that there will be more after this. This is just their first go at it. And this is mainly going to pertain, I would imagine, to further checks to go out to people, $2,000 checks, and any other type of COVID relief that they want to come up with. So after this, they'll probably tackle some sort of portion of the Green New Deal, something that has to do with health care, something that, something in addition to the Green New Deal with the environment, and God only knows what else. Student debt, mortgage payments, rent payments. Who knows what they're going to come up with next, but it's going to be extremely, extremely expensive. So let's get this straight. Once again, $900 billion, $1.4 trillion, and now this $2 trillion. Now, I don't imagine it's going to be $2 trillion, but the Democrats do control all houses of the government. But I imagine that the Republicans will grow a spine miraculously and sort of hold this off as long as they can. But something will get passed. So that takes us to $4.3 trillion. Okay? $4.3 trillion. Again, our trusty dusty usdebtclock.org. What's this tell us? The U.S. federal government brings in tax revenue $3.5 trillion. So we're already in the hole $800 billion. Just from this, and it's only January. Now, the fiscal year for the government starts in October. I don't care how you look at it. You want to base it off the fiscal year, you want to look it off the calendar year. I don't care. This is out of control, and it's only going to get worse. So we're already having a deficit right off the bat, $800 billion. Then you take the traditional, the basic spending that our government does. That's about another $500 billion. So we are well over $1 trillion in deficit, and it's only January. And then you just wait until this stuff does not work, as we're starting to see with a continuation of poor job growth. None, actually. 800,000 initial jobless claims week over week or thereabouts. And we're almost a year into the COVID-19 restrictions and lockdowns. 140,000 jobs lost, according to the official jobs report released last Friday. This is all in the wrong direction. All of those trillions of dollars that were printed last year, they're wearing off. Now, the stock market continues to climb. Certain individual stocks continue to climb. Like I said, as long as Tesla's up, everything's right in the world. As long as JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs are up, everything's fine. Don't worry about the tens of millions of Americans facing evictions. Tens of millions of Americans in food bank lines. Pay no attention to the real people, to the real economy. As long as a couple major corporations' stock is doing fine, that's all you have to pay attention to. The other thing that might get thrown into this bill or a subsequent one, because I think crazy Bernie Sanders is going to become the chair of the Budget Committee in the Senate, so God help us all, they're going to end up pushing for a $15 minimum wage. So let's just understand this, right? We look at the official jobs report here every month. We read it every month since this crisis, since last April, okay? We take the time, at least, it comes out the first Friday of every month. We try to do it that day. We know the majority of jobs lost tend to be in sectors and industries that have low pay to begin with. So if these industries cannot afford to keep these people on the payroll at their current wage, and for many of them it's below $15 an hour, what makes these people think that they're going to hire them back if they are now forced by law to pay them $15 an hour? How are they going to be able to do that? The answer is they're not going to be able to do that. So this is just going to continue to prolong and worsen the structural unemployment and underemployment situation. And then, of course, people will get hired back, and now they're going to have to pay this higher wage. So what does that mean? Well, again, there's only a few options available to any company. They can eat the entire cost, so their margins will get squeezed, so their profits will go down, which is not good because that's how they're going to grow and invest in themselves, etc., etc. They can pass those cost increases on to their customers, but that's not great either because they're trying to capture market share, one would think. And if you keep increasing your prices, well, you're probably going to lose some of your customer base. So that's a tricky balance. And of course, they can do some variation thereof. They can eat and absorb some of that, so their margins are still going to get squeezed, but they're also going to pass along some of those cost increases due to the wage hike. Net, this is not good for anybody. What the government fails to realize is that the reason that so many people would cry and scream for a higher minimum wage is because the cost of living is so expensive. If everything was not as expensive as it is, due to asinine, flawed economic policies, due to excessive taxation and regulation and inflation, well, maybe people could afford to live. Maybe people wouldn't be living paycheck to paycheck, but they are. Maybe people would actually have some savings, but they don't. I'm going to talk about that a little bit further today, too, because that was sort of at the tail end of yesterday's podcast. So I just want to reiterate some of that data, again, from the USDebtClock.org with respect to savings, because that's a really heartbreaking statistic, and it just goes to prove what I have been preaching here since I started this podcast back in 2019. They don't understand that they are the ones in the way. that people are crying out for more money because the cost of living is so expensive. If prices actually came down, well, then it becomes more relative. No, I'm not living paycheck to paycheck. Now I don't need to use credit cards to make ends meet and then pay a ridiculous interest rate on top of it. They just don't get it. They can't get out of their own way. They might be well-intentioned. Some of them might actually think that this works, so they are truly well-intentioned. But they're idiots. They just don't grasp it. And then there are those who do grasp it. They know the pitfalls of this, but it's the politically convenient argument for their side, so they push it anyway. Either way, net, this is not the right policy to be implementing. And it's just going, again, to create further structural unemployment and underemployment. Because $15 an hour, that's a decent amount of money, especially in a lot of parts of the country. Well, there are a lot of young people, teenagers, that have no experience whatsoever, and quite honestly, their skill set is not worth $15 an hour, at least not out of the gate. So allow them to learn a skill, allow them to understand what it means to go to work, have a job, work for a boss, take orders, work with colleagues, work with customers, prove themselves, and then you give them a raise, you give them a promotion. That's how it's supposed to work. Not just say, well, cost of living so high, let's just increase the minimum wage and everything else, but that's not how it works. Get out of the way. Get rid of the income tax. Get rid of the Federal Reserve. Get rid of these ridiculous regulations. Allow free market capitalism to work. Allow people to negotiate their wages. Allow people to prove themselves, to prove their worth. That's how it's supposed to work. It's not that difficult, but these guys just can't get out of the way. So, again, looking at the usdebtclock.org with respect to savings. So, as it stands right now, savings per family comes out to about $28,500. Now, this is an average. This is an average. So, this number is heavily skewed by the upper echelons of the income brackets, because they have a lot of liquid cash in savings. So this is greatly skewed. So it would be nice to have the median savings per family on the usdebtclock.org, just so we would have some sort of relational analysis to understand where that stands. Of course, I can go find that, but I'm just trying to keep this brief here with the usdebtclock.org. Great one-stop shop, believe me. So $28,500. And there's most definitely a lot of families, unfortunately, that have a negative balance. They have negative savings. They are in debt. So, even with that said, it's still a positive number. $28,500. You fast forward to January 13th, 2025, only 4 years away. Savings per family is now at $1,500. $1,500. A loss of about 95%. You get it? You get why all of these policies are destructive? They are devastating? This is theft. This is taxation. This is inflation. This is the loss of opportunity in the future, because those future opportunities have been stolen just so we can fill the void today, right now, just so everybody can feel like everything's okay, so we can live in this modern monetary theory world, MMT, UBI, universal basic income world. This is completely unsustainable. $27.8 trillion national debt today. 4 years from now, $49.1 trillion. From George Washington to Donald J. Trump in 2019, $22 trillion national debt. within the first 4 years of the Biden administration, we're going to put that much more onto the national debt. We were spiraling out of control. This is exponential growth in the wrong direction. Didn't have to be like this because exponential growth could have worked for us in the right direction. Savings, investment, production. That grows an economy. Japanese market is up, as I stated earlier in the podcast going over market performance. Why? Because they love the news that another $2 trillion is coming down the pike that the United States does not have. They don't care. And the Bank of Japan is signaling that they will be engaged in more stimulus if they have to do so as well, if the health crisis gets worse. Spending does not equal growth. Printing money does not equal growth. If it did, there would never be a recession. It's that simple, but these questions are never asked. They're never brought up. 28,500 to 1,500. People are already suffering as it is. This is only going to get worse. Do you understand this? And the people that think that inflation doesn't exist, they need smacked across the face. What don't you get? Well, I guess if we strip out food prices and commodity prices and energy costs and housing costs, well, then, it's pretty affordable. All you have to do is not eat. Don't produce or consume anything because that would involve commodities and energy prices, and sleep outside in a tent. If you can do all those things, well, there's no inflation. Don't go to the doctor. Don't use any type of health care. And don't you dare go to school and try to educate yourself either, because those costs are through the roof too. But other than that, there's no inflation. And of course, the government has every incentive in the world to calculate inflation as low as possible. Because one of the biggest outlays is, of course, Social Security. And God forbid they actually compensate the recipients on Social Security with a true cost of living adjustment, which of course would be inflation. They don't want to give you that true cost of living adjustment increase year over year, because we'd never make it. If that was the case, we might be near $49 trillion national debt today. Not 4 years from now, today, if they actually calculated inflation properly to truly reflect what's going on in the real economy. So understand this. The government screws you over for your entire working career, 30, 40, 50 years, taking all that money out, Social Security taxes. And then once you receive it, they don't give you a true cost of living adjustment increase year over year. They don't do it. They screw you both ways. And people are supposed to be thankful that they're getting a check. This is what the government does and is, folks. They break your legs, then they give you crutches and say, without me, you'd be crawling on the ground. At least you got crutches. At least you can hold yourself up. Yeah, but weren't you the guy that broke my legs? No, don't pay any attention to that. I just gave you crutches. Be thankful. That's the government. Those are central banks. That's how they operate. And then furthermore, when you're trying to calculate real GDP, okay, so you have nominal GDP growth minus the inflation rate gives you the real GDP figure. Well, if the inflation rate is lower, then you're going to have a higher real GDP rate. You get it? All the incentives are for the government to cheat, to make themselves look better, to make GDP figures look better than what they really are, to not pass the buck on to you, the recipient of Social Security and other programs, because they don't want to pay it, because they can't, because we're broke. First World Banana Republic. This is easy stuff, ladies and gentlemen. The dots are all there. You just have to connect them. And the best stuff are just the numbers that you can count up. You don't have to do any fancy math. You don't have to do any fancy forecasting or modeling. You don't have to be an economist. Don't have to be a mathematician. Just have to understand some basic math and connect the dots and paint the picture. Now, understanding some of the finer points to know what type of policies to adopt to correct this craziness, well, then it's going to help to have some stronger math skills, some stronger economic analysis skills, But that's what I'm here for. Get rid of the income tax, abolish the Federal Reserve, cut back on regulations, restore the rule of law, restore free market capitalism, allow people to live, allow people to be free. And round we go. That's it. It's not complicated. We have the blueprint. We know it works. Yet these idiots want to pass another $4.3 trillion in money that we don't have, pass a $15 minimum wage that's only going to cause more problems, and who knows what else they're going to come down the pike with. So that's it. Impeached again in savings stolen. And we're supposed to be thankful. Stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Capital News. I am Alex Koritis. Godspeed.